Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into something that's changed my life profoundly, and I believe it can change yours too. We're talking about self-acceptance, not just as a feel-good concept, but as a transformative practice rooted in ancient wisdom that can revolutionize how you experience your daily life. Before we begin, I want to ask you to stay with me throughout this entire journey. I know we all have the urge to skip ahead or click away when things get a bit deep, but what I'm about to share builds progressively, and each part lays the foundation for deeper understanding. Trust me when I say that by the end of our time together, you'll have practical insights that you can immediately apply to your life. The ancient Stoics, those practical philosophers from nearly 2,000 years ago, developed an approach to life that remains astonishingly relevant today. At the heart of their philosophy was a radical idea. True freedom comes not from controlling the outside world, but from mastering our internal responses to it. And that journey begins with genuine self-acceptance. As Epictetus, who was once a slave before becoming one of the most revered Stoic teachers, wisely put it, "Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens." This profound statement contains the seed of self-acceptance, acknowledging what we can and cannot control, and finding peace in that distinction. Let me share a personal story. 3 years ago, I found myself in a place of constant dissatisfaction. I was always comparing myself to others, always feeling like I wasn't enough, not successful enough, not smart enough, not fit enough. This endless cycle of self-criticism was exhausting and worse, completely unproductive. I was trapped in a prison of my own making. My turning point came when I stumbled upon the writings of Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who wrote his private philosophical reflections that we now know as meditations. In one passage he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Those words hit me like a revelation. I'd been pouring my energy into trying to control how others perceived me, trying to meet impossible standards, and constantly feeling like a failure when I couldn't. What Marcus Aurelius taught me was to redirect that energy inward, to focus on accepting myself fully, flaws and all. This isn't easy in our modern world. We're bombarded with images of perfection, with social media feeds showcasing everyone's highlight reels while we're intimately familiar with our own behind-the-scenes struggles. The gap between where we are and where we think we should be often feels insurmountable. But here's what the Stoics would tell us: that gap exists primarily in our minds. The constant striving for some idealized version of ourselves prevents us from accepting and appreciating who we actually are right now. Seneca, another great Stoic philosopher, wrote in his letters, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." How true this is when it comes to self-acceptance. We imagine that accepting ourselves as we are means giving up on growth or improvement. But the Stoics would argue the exact opposite. True growth can only begin from a place of honest self-acceptance. Think about it this way. Imagine trying to navigate from your current location to a destination. If you input the wrong starting point into your GPS, you'll never arrive where you want to go. Similarly, if we don't accept where we truly are in life, our strengths, weaknesses, circumstances, how can we possibly chart an effective path forward? Self-acceptance isn't about resignation or settling. It's about clarity. It's about removing the distortions of wishful thinking and harsh self-judgment to see ourselves as we truly are. And from that clear-eyed vantage point, meaningful change becomes possible. As Marcus Aurelius advised, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this, you have the power to revoke at any moment. When we apply this wisdom to how we view ourselves, we realize that much of our self-dissatisfaction comes not from objective reality, but from the judgments we've attached to that reality. Let me give you a concrete example. Perhaps you've struggled with being more introverted than you'd like. You see others networking effortlessly at social events while you feel drained after brief interactions. You might have spent years beating yourself up about this, trying to force yourself to be more extroverted and feeling like a failure when it doesn't come naturally. But what if instead you practiced self-acceptance? You might acknowledge, this is how my nervous system is wired. I recharge through solitude and connect deeply with fewer people rather than broadly with many. From this place of acceptance, you can work with your nature rather than against it. You might schedule recovery time after social events, focus on one-on-one connections rather than large gatherings, or develop strategies that allow your authentic self to thrive. The Stoics emphasized working with reality rather than fighting against it. As Epictetus put it, don't seek to have events happen as you wish, but wish them to happen as they do happen, and your life will go smoothly. Now, I want to address a common misunderstanding about self-acceptance. Some people worry that accepting themselves means becoming complacent or giving up on personal growth. Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, the Stoics were deeply committed to continuous improvement, but they understood that lasting improvement must be built on the foundation of self-acceptance. Consider the wisdom of Epictetus. Again, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. When we accept ourselves, we're not saying that we'll never change or grow. We're simply choosing to react to our current reality with compassion rather than condemnation. And paradoxically, this compassionate acceptance often creates the psychological safety needed for genuine change to occur. Think about it in terms of learning any new skill. If you're learning to play the piano and you berate yourself harshly, for every mistake, you'll likely feel tense, anxious, and ultimately make slower progress. But if you accept that mistakes are a natural part of learning, you can acknowledge them without judgment, learn from them, and continue to improve. The same principle applies to personal development. When we accept ourselves, we can look at our patterns, habits, and tendencies with curiosity rather than criticism. That's interesting. I notice I tend to procrastinate when I'm feeling uncertain. This curious, accepting stance creates space for growth that harsh self-judgment never could. As Seneca wisely noted, we learn not in the school, but in life. Self-acceptance allows us to be present for the lessons that life is constantly offering us, rather than being trapped in cycles of regret about the past or anxiety about the future. Now, let's talk about how to practically cultivate self-acceptance in your daily life. The Stoics were nothing if not practical, and they gave us several powerful techniques that we can adapt for modern use. First is the practice of objective self-observation. Marcus Aurelius would regularly examine his thoughts and actions, not to judge himself, but to understand himself better. He wrote, "Look within. Within is the fountain of good, and it will ever bubble up if you will ever dig." Try this. Set aside a few minutes each evening for reflection. Ask yourself, what went well today? What challenged me? Where did I feel resistance? Observe these things as you might observe weather patterns, with interest but without attachment. This practice helps you develop the habit of seeing yourself clearly, which is the first step toward acceptance. Second is what the Stoics called negative visualization, deliberately contemplating what could go wrong or what you might lose. While this sounds pessimistic, it actually serves to increase gratitude and acceptance of what is. Seneca advised, "We should remind our spirits to be prepared for everything and to reflect that whatever can happen already has in many cases." In terms of self-acceptance, try visualizing what it would be like to continue living without accepting yourself. Imagine carrying the burden of self-judgment for another year, 5 years, or decade. Then contrast this with the freedom that could come from acceptance. This contrast often motivates us to choose the path of self-acceptance, challenging as it may initially be. Third is the practice of distinguishing between what we can and cannot control. Epictetus emphasized this distinction as the cornerstone of Stoic philosophy. Some things are within our power while others are not. Within our power are opinion, motivation, desire, aversion, and in a word, whatever is of our own doing. Not within our power are our body, our property, reputation, office, and in a word, whatever is not of our own doing. When it comes to self-acceptance, this means acknowledging that certain aspects of yourself, your past, your inherent temperament, your natural aptitudes or limitations, may be largely outside your control. Rather than railing against these realities, Stoicism teaches us to accept them and focus our energy on what we can influence, our judgments, our choices, and our actions going forward. Fourth is the practice of cosmopolitanism, seeing yourself as part of a larger human family. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "We were born to work together like feet, hands, and eyes, like the 2 rows of teeth, upper and lower. To obstruct each other is unnatural. To feel anger at someone, to turn your back on them, these are obstructions. When we recognize our shared humanity, we often become more accepting of our own struggles. Everyone faces challenges, everyone has flaws, everyone makes mistakes. This perspective doesn't eliminate the need for personal responsibility, but it does help us avoid the trap of believing that our imperfections somehow make us unworthy or separate from others. Let me share another personal example of how I've applied these principles. For years, I struggled with perfectionism in my work. I would spend excessive time on projects, agonizing over every detail, and still feel dissatisfied with the results. I judged myself harshly for not meeting impossible standards, and this judgment created a constant background noise of stress and anxiety. Through practicing Stoic-inspired self-acceptance, I began to observe this pattern objectively. I noticed how perfectionism was actually interfering with my productivity and creativity. I distinguished between what I could control, my effort, my process, and what I couldn't, others' reactions, arbitrary standards of perfection. Most importantly, I began to accept that making mistakes and producing imperfect work didn't make me defective or unworthy. It made me human. As Epictetus puts it, if anyone tells you that a certain person speaks ill of you, do not make excuses about what is said of you, but answer, "He was ignorant of my other faults, else he would not have mentioned these alone." This shift toward self-acceptance didn't lower my standards. It actually freed me to do better work. When I wasn't expending so much energy on self-judgment, I had more creative resources available. I could take appropriate risks without fear of failure defining my worth. I could learn from criticism without being devastated by it. Here's something important the Stoics understood. Self-acceptance isn't just about feeling better, though it certainly helps with that. It's about living better, making wiser choices, contributing more effectively to the world around you, and experiencing genuine tranquility even amid life's inevitable challenges. As Seneca observed, "The greatest obstacle to living is expectancy, which hangs upon tomorrow and loses today." When we're caught in patterns of self-rejection, we're always living for some future version of ourselves, the one who will finally be worthy once they've achieved certain goals or fixed certain flaws. Meanwhile, our actual life, the only one we have, passes unlived. Self-acceptance brings us back to the present moment. It allows us to say, "This is who I am right now, and that's okay." From this grounded place, we can then ask, How do I want to direct my energy today? What values do I want to express in my actions? How can I contribute from exactly where I stand? I want to address something that might be coming up for some of you. You might be thinking, but what about accountability? What about having high standards? Doesn't self-acceptance mean I'll just let myself off the hook for behaviors I should change? This is where the Stoic approach to self-acceptance differs from some modern interpretations. The Stoics were deeply committed to virtue and personal responsibility. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself of his duties and held himself to high standards of conduct. But here's the key distinction. They understood that beating yourself up for past mistakes or current limitations doesn't lead to improvement. It leads to demoralization. True accountability comes from accepting reality as it is, taking responsibility for what you can control, and then acting accordingly. As Epictetus advised, make the best use of what is in your power and take to the rest as it happens. Self-acceptance isn't about excusing harmful behaviors or giving up on positive change. It's about acknowledging your current reality without denial or distortion, so you can respond to it wisely rather than reactively. When we reject parts of ourselves, we often create internal conflict that actually makes positive change more difficult. We develop compensatory behaviors to avoid facing what we can't accept. We project our unaccepted traits onto others and judge them harshly. We exhaust ourselves trying to maintain facades rather than addressing root causes. Self-acceptance, by contrast, creates internal harmony. It allows us to direct our energy toward growth rather than self-protection. It enables us to connect more authentically with others because we're no longer hiding from ourselves. As we begin to wrap up our time together, I want to leave you with some practical steps to begin cultivating greater self-acceptance in your daily life. First, practice mindful awareness of your self-talk. Notice when you slip into patterns of harsh self-judgment and gently redirect yourself toward more objective, compassionate observation. As Marcus Aurelius advised, if you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your own judgment about it. And it is in your power to wipe out this judgment now. Second, distinguish between unconditional self-acceptance and conditional self-evaluation. You can accept yourself completely as a worthy human being while still evaluating specific behaviors or results as needing improvement. Your worth isn't determined by your performance. Third, practice what the Stoics called amor fati, a love of fate. This means not merely accepting what happens, but embracing it as necessary for your growth. When you catch yourself wishing you were different in some fundamental way, try asking, how might this characteristic or circumstance I'm resisting actually serve me or others in some way? What opportunities for growth does it present? Fourth, remember that self-acceptance is not a destination, but a continuous practice. Even the Stoic philosophers, with all their wisdom, had to remind themselves daily of these principles. Be patient with yourself as you develop this skill. Finally, look for role models of genuine self-acceptance. These aren't necessarily people who have achieved perfection in any area, but rather those who demonstrate comfort in their own skin, who can acknowledge their limitations without shame, and who direct their energy toward living according to their values rather than defending their egos. As Epictetus reminds us, it's impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows. Perhaps the greatest benefit of self-acceptance is that it opens us to genuine learning about ourselves, about others, and about how to live well in an imperfect world. I hope this exploration of self-acceptance through the lens of Stoic philosophy has given you both inspiration and practical guidance. Remember that like any worthwhile skill, self-acceptance takes practice and patience. Be kind to yourself as you work with these concepts, Thank you for staying with me throughout this video. I'd love to hear about your own journey with self-acceptance in the comments below. What aspects of yourself have been hardest to accept? What practices have helped you move toward greater self-acceptance? Your insights might be exactly what another viewer needs to hear. Until next time, remember the words of Marcus Aurelius. Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. May you find the peace that comes from truly accepting yourself as you are.